is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Blacklist Podcast. If you were tuning in with us for the very first time today, let me go ahead and introduce ourselves. This lovely lady, normally she's to the left of me, but now she's in her own little space, is the lovely Brianna Elizabeth. My name is Jared Blaine, and we are missing swag, but we are the host of the Blacklist Podcast, and today's guest is a recovery and mental health advocate. With more than 20 years under his belt, he's a certified addictions therapist and clinical trauma professional. He's the co-founder and clinical director of the Yatra Trauma Treatment Centre in Krabi, Thailand. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the show, Mike Miller.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I know our fellow podcaster, Chuck from the Ashes to Awesome, was on my butt to get you on. So I'm excited. I'm excited to kind of just be able to talk and kind of hear your story and, you know, just shoot
I hope
shit.
I don't let Chuck down and live up to that billing.
I don't think you can let Chuck down. It's all right.
I'm sure you're better behaved than Chuck is on these.
Let's hope so. No, just kidding. He's awesome.
Yeah, listen, Chuck hits on Brianna every single time, so I'm used to it. So that's what she means. You're better behaved.
Don't watch the episode
I
from
won't
earlier.
do that. I promise.
Oh, the weekend ramble?
Yeah, don't watch it from earlier.
Oh, great.
It's better off not watching.
Now I'm gonna have to go watch it. So you're in Thailand, man. So
Yeah.
that's how long you been there?
About 11 years.
Okay. And where are you from originally?
Vancouver and Vancouver Island, Canada.
Okay. All right.
So,
Man, there's so many people from Canada.
yeah, well, it's amazing for a place with a small population.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine that he actually won some travel on a TV game show kind of thing and traveled here. And I was working with him in a treatment center in Canada, and then we worked in outpatient treatment together. And when he came traveling here, he fell in love with the place, and there was a rehab just starting up. And so he connected with them, got a job, and then I came to visit him, and they offered me a job. At first, I said no and went back home. And then I came to visit again another time, and they offered me a job. And at that point, I was pretty disillusioned with the place I was working at. So I took him up on it and moved over here to work as a counselor at their treatment center and did that for the next 9 years, I guess.
Okay. There you go. Yeah, I know Chuck was when he won, he was very ecstatic to go out there to do the treatment. But then at the end of the day, he was like super, it was crazy. You know, he's like, man, I wish everybody could do it. It's like, it would be really awesome just to everyone to get a chance to dive into their trauma therapy and everything.
Oh, that was one of the things. Obviously I can't talk about, I know he's quite open about it, but I can't really talk about his stuff too much, just, the confidentiality, but he is quite open about it. But yeah, I think what became apparent to me through my own history, with my using and everything, and then my recovery and then working in the field is that, there's a lot of trauma underpinning a lot of people's substance use, or other behavioral, addictions or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you think about it, like mental health and addiction and trauma and all that. It's all hand in hand. So it's you got to think like why we start using to begin with, and a lot of times it's trauma. It's shit that happened to us. At least for me, I know that's what it was for me, was all the trauma as a child, and so I'm not going to speak for everybody, but it does go. It plays a defining factor in it.
Well, I think one of the things for me is like, and it would be funny, like people, when I worked in rehab settings, people I think thought it was kind of weird that I would say this, but that drugs aren't addictive. Like people always talk about like, oh, this is the most addictive drug. And it's like, well, if drugs like as a compound were actually addictive, then everyone who ever did one would be addicted. But certain people use them compulsively as a way to soothe themselves. And then, that's what we get to know as addiction, right? Is this compulsive behavior around the use. But like if alcohol was addictive, then as a compound, anyone who ever had a drink would be an alcoholic. So why is it that some people's relationships to drugs and alcohol are different than other people's? And for me, it's about that, like, even you can go right back to the big book of AA that says like, the relief that comes from the first drink, or I can't remember the exact quote of it, but people have known for a long time it's about like easing up that sense of relief, right, or escapism. So I think to me that became obvious.
I heard somebody, I think it was Quinn, that he said he wasn't addicted to the drugs, but he was addicted to escaping reality.
Sure.
And it's crazy because if you think about it, like, yeah, like that's why we do it. But then it's at the end of the day too, like this is very important to work through all that trauma, because you don't just get sober and your life's magically better. Like
sometimes
you have to treat, you got to treat the root. You got to treat the root of the problem.
Absolutely.
The root of the problem. Okay. So we got to go back to that. That's just my opinion. Like, even when it goes into like, them, police throwing addicts in the jail and whatnot, and they give them a prison sentence, but they offer them no resources or this, that, or the third. And it's just like, you're locking them up, but you're not offering any resources to treat the root of the problem. So if you never treat the root of the problem, it's always going to be a continuous cycle. So that's why we have therapy and all this other stuff.
I would suggest that actually is re-traumatizing and probably replicating a lot of their earlier traumas where their needs weren't met by people that were supposed to take care of them, like a system, whether it's a family or a school or church or wherever it might come from. Their needs not being met, so then they're medicating themselves, and then the government is another system. Their needs aren't being met. They're getting punished for having symptoms of this thing. And rehabs can do that too, right? I worked in rehabs a lot where there would be, in a group room, someone doesn't feel safe to share, and they get branded as defiant, oppositional, resistant, all this stuff. And it's like, no, they just don't feel safe to walk into a room full of people that they don't know and start talking about all their deepest, darkest stuff. And that system ends up re-traumatizing them too, I think. And so, I tell people, like, I might be a bit sort of like myopic, like I see things through one lens. I do see things through the lens of trauma. I think it underpins a lot of mental health issues, including addiction issues. And yeah, we have a saying, addiction is the smoke, trauma is the fire, right? Like, it's good to clear out the smoke, but if you're not putting out that fire, then you're probably going to have more smoke down the road. I mean, and again, I don't want to speak in concrete terms like that's true for everyone, but I know that, like you say, when you first get sober, it isn't magically better, and for a lot of people it's magically worse, because now you've taken away all the medicine and you still have all the pain, right?
That's what me, Chuck, and Dr. Lisa, we were supposed to talk about earlier. We were supposed to talk about my Suboxone journey, my decisions to get on and tapering and getting off, and how my life has been since I've gotten off. And Chuck kind of told me to just go through like my addiction real quick. And I literally just said at, 8, I tried my first drug. 14, I started using drugs regularly. Got sober every time I had a kid, and then got sober. Like, I went through it really quick. And then Dr. Lisa started asking me questions. She's like, well, as an 8-year-old, how were you trying drugs? And we kind of went into that, and our conversation turned into like those mirroring behaviors that we learned. Because when I got sober, I had an amazing therapist. I have control issues. So I kept telling myself, and even before I went to it, like, I'm in control of the conversation. I'm in control of these conversations. I'm not going to bring up, she doesn't know about my life. She only knows what I tell her. So I finally started getting more comfortable with her. And I remember this one session, she was asking me questions, and it went back to my childhood. Mike, I ran for 6 months. I just randomly called her one day, like 6-7 months later, and I was like, hey, can I make an appointment? And she's like, yeah, sure. But it scared me to go back and accept that not all of these behaviors in my life and everything that I've done, I learned on my own. Because we want to protect our parents, and to go back and unload that and talk about the fact that I probably learned some of these coping mechanisms, from my safe people.
Yeah.
and just going back and seeing like those behaviors as a kid that I thought were normal, I'm still doing those and I need to relearn those, so it was huge because I thought, it was just, you know, being molested or parents splitting up, like bigger things than that.
Yeah.
And when I started really digging and unloading under all of that, I realized my trauma doesn't come from here, from something that happened to me when I was 20 or 15. It goes all the way back to me being a kid.
Yeah.
And to like go that far back in your life and be able to unload that was amazing for me. And I'm so grateful that like I gave in and was able to do that and had somebody that understood, enough that, this is important too.
For sure. Yeah. And it's terrifying, right? This
Oh,
is,
yes.
I would want to touch on a few things that you said there. One is like that myth about what trauma is and what it isn't. That it's got to be childhood sexual abuse, being in a plane crash, poverty, war zones, like that's what it is. And it's kind of limited to that. But trauma isn't what happened. Trauma is what we're left with after something happens. And it's a normal response to abnormal events, right? And so say, for example, I use this example all the time. If a dog gets kicked by a person when it's growing, like when it's a puppy, it becomes leery about people as an adult, right? And like that's just, it's the way that our brain works. We have memories about something being dangerous, and then when we see something else, the way, I won't get into like a big neuroscience lecture or anything like that, but it is neuroscience, right? How that information gets accessed in our brain, our amygdala that sets off the stress responses consults with the hippocampus and asks, like, do we have memories on this thing? Is that scary? And the hippocampus goes, oh yeah, it was scary before. And then the amygdala sets off the stress response, and boom, what is stress? Like that's a traumatic response, right? Heart rate, like adrenaline, cortisol, or shutdown. Like this is all nervous system stuff. And so, that doesn't have to come from, like you say, abuse or something like that. And it doesn't have to come from anyone with ill intentions. Like that's one of the reasons people, you can feel guilty about seeking therapy about childhood stuff, because we love our parents and we believe they did the best job, and they did do the best job, but it can literally be a throwaway comment by a parent. I'm like 10 years old and I say to my dad, I'm going to be a doctor. And he said, don't be silly. You're not smart enough to be a doctor. And the next thing you know, like I form this belief about myself, like I'm not good enough. I'm never going to accomplish things, like whatever it is. And then that informs how I apply myself in school, what my career looks like, the group of friends that I fall into, and all of this kind of stuff. And literally, if I ask him about it, he won't remember it happening, but it's like a very defining moment for me about forming beliefs about myself. And so we don't just address like, what are these big activities or events that happened, like, were you in a plane crash? I mean, of course, if you were, it could be traumatic for sure. But it can be like, where do these beliefs that you have, where do they stem from? What memories do you have that support you having these beliefs? And then we start targeting that stuff with EMDR. Because one of the other things I wanted to mention about what you said is like talk therapy and retelling traumatic narratives can also be re-traumatizing at times, right? And it's why a lot of people drop out of things like exposure therapy, because you have to tell the story over and over again. And that is so hard to do, especially in a setting where you go in once a week and then you go back to your own life. And you have all your triggers and all your stresses and your job and your kids and like all that stuff. And access to like drinking and drugs to relieve yourself of that, or sex or work or gambling or whatever it might be, some form of relief, right? And that's why we practice therapies that you don't tell those traumatic narratives, because this is again, it's all brain science stuff that informs what we do, nervous system stuff. But it's interesting, like that, just to hear about like the common mythology about like what trauma is, and some of the common narratives, like, oh, that, Brianna, that happened a long time ago, you should just get over it, and oh, that happened to everyone, and like that kind of stuff, which just minimizes it, invalidates my experience, and then it reinforces those beliefs of like, yeah, I'm stupid, I should just, now I'm weak, or whatever it might be, right? So
yeah, that's how I used to look at it. Like, I have a little box that I put away in the corner, and once a week I'm taking that box, I'm taking my armor off, and I'm throwing this box at myself, and then I have to put that shield back on and put that back in a box in the corner.
Yeah.
And that's difficult for some people, especially in, recovery, which I think, I think it makes it safe to be able to do that at Yatra, it's from what I know, because you are in an environment where you have support around you and help.
That's a huge ask, to ask someone in their life to go and like pull out that container and do. So to be able to do that in a situation that's an outpatient basis is like monumental to me. Like and a lot of people can't do it. And the reason that Yatra exists, well, first of all, like I mirror some of your story. Started drinking at 12, regular drug user at 14, selling drugs at 15, cocaine at 16, heroin at 19, jail at 18. Like, it was like the whole thing. Moved out really young, all of that. Got clean when I was 32 after a couple of tries at treatment. Stayed in treatment for a long time. They didn't, I was getting like accolades for like, oh, you're clean, everything's great. But meanwhile, I'm like not using drugs or alcohol, but I'm acting out in all these other different ways because I still was like trying to medicate all this pain I was in. And so then I started going to get therapy, right? And I was like, oh, okay, so this is all like the penny started to drop, right? It was like, okay, so this is behavior. Some of it was socialized in the family, learned behavior stuff. And some of it was just like this self-medicating, like compulsive self-soothing stuff. I already had like all these like well-known strategies for changing the way I felt, obviously, right? But I wasn't going to let myself go back to drugs and alcohol at that point. So, it was coming out in sex, food, like, et cetera, work. I'm going to school at night, I'm working in the day. Then when I'm done school, I'm like, keep going to school in other ways, or I work in the day, work at night, 2 different jobs. Like, I'm just like, it's just running. And people are going, you're doing awesome. And I'm going like, well, I don't feel awesome. And that's where the therapy kind of came in to sort of get like what was underpinning that. And thank God I stayed clean through that. But yeah, it's.
So do you think that you were like just staying busy so you didn't have to feel anything? Like you didn't have time to.
Yeah.
You just didn't have time.
Yeah. I was a human doing, not a human being, right? Like I was trying to outrun that stuff. I couldn't just sit and like relax. Like my nervous system will get too, dysregulated if I just had to sit and with the pain. So I can't, if I'm bored, I'm like, oh, I'll pick up the phone, or, back then it wasn't like quite as much access to phones, like, all the stuff that you can use at that point. But, TV, books, but more than anything, it was like dating and that kind of stuff, right? It was like escapism through dating, which was pretty.
And I don't think Jared's going to speak up about it, but I've known him through a couple states, Oregon, Arizona, and now he's in New York with me. And when I first met him, like he worked, but he also kind of had a lot of like downtime and free time, and he would, be at home and go visit family. And then he moved to Arizona, which is where he was using, and his life got extremely busy.
Sure.
Busy, like he never stopped unless he was sleeping. He was always busy, always doing something, but he was battling constantly, and now he's here. And I love that I can see, that he can sit down and, watch a movie or take a day off and stuff like that. So it's, it's what you were saying. Sometimes, people do have to self-reflect and realize, and think about like, why am I doing this?
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, Jared.
Yep. No, I was gonna say I agree. Like staying busy is like was one of the biggest things to do. Like for me, like I'm from Arizona. That's where born and raised. That's where I was using. And when I moved away in 2018, I stayed away for like 2 years before I went back to visit for the very first time. But even then, like I moved back when I was just under 4 years, right? 4 years sober, because I'm over 5 years now.
Nice.
But I moved back, and when I moved back, like I didn't have like any, like I wasn't worried. Well, at least I didn't think I wasn't worried. But like, it's just then all the anxiety started kicking in, about people, places, things, and so I was always just had to do something. I ride motorcycle, so I mean, I would be out riding my motorcycle all the time, or just doing this, that, or the third. So. Some people, they got to do that. They got to stay busy. And now out here, like you said, I could sleep till, I could sleep till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Not that it happens a lot, but like if I had the ability, here I am.
Yeah.
I can like relax, and I don't always have to just have my guard up like, oh, I got to stay busy, because if not, I'm going to like think about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. So think about that the way that you were coping or dealing with life, or whatever you want to call it, changed based on the environment. Right. And so that speaks to why we do what we do, where we do it. Like during the pandemic, I was doing online therapy with people, and, so it's trauma focused. And we know, like with trauma, like a lot of it is you have to feel safe in your body, or you can't get past this stuff, right? So like if I'm constantly needing to be on the go, how can I rest and relax and feel safe in my body? And so I would ask people online, like, it'd be pretty useful if you could maybe like do some mindfulness or yoga. And they'd say, yeah, I'm sure it probably would be, but like I'm stuck in my flat in London and I'm by myself, and to get the momentum or the ability to self-motivate to do that is such a huge ask. And I was like, yeah, of course it is. Like, I get that. So then after the pandemic, the rehab I was working at had asked me to come back and run it. And I thought, you know what, like I just see things differently than traditional treatment does. And it speaks to this. What does treatment do? Like they're traditionally, and of course, I haven't been to every treatment center, and I haven't worked at every treatment center, but in my experiences, they keep you busy from morning till night, right? And it's like, especially private ones, because then it's like they can justify the high prices and all, like, oh, look what we offer. We offer this and this and this and this and this. But is it just replicating that constant distraction that we do before we go to treatment, or after we go to treatment, but aren't necessarily able to kind of sit and deal with all the stuff yet, right? And so I was like, no, I'm going to do things different. We need to be able to be a trauma focused program. And we're a trauma center, but so many of our clients have substance use issues in their past, or identify other addictions, whether it's gaming or gambling or sex or whatever it is. And people needing to, like, being able to leave their environment, come to us, be really supported. Like Brianna, you were saying, like, going to your therapist once a week, and in between having to like pull out that container and then put your shield back on. Like, we give people a place to put the shield down if that's what they need to do. We give them time in between sessions. It's like quite intensive. You get like 4 EMDR sessions a week, a couple of CBT sessions a week, once you are able to kind of access that part of your brain where you can do some good thinking. Because if you're in survival mode, it's hard to make great decisions, right? And we give them a lot of mindfulness, yoga, Tai Chi, progressive muscle relaxation, ice baths, steam room, like all this stuff, so that like we can really take care of the physical stuff and have them be able to relax. But being out of their environment, like not being in Arizona where all the triggers are, where you don't have to outrun them, like people can actually just like, But I wonder, like, what would have happened if you stayed in Arizona? Because, like, this water bottle is not heavy, right? Like, I can hold this. But what does my shoulder feel like in 10 minutes? Like, what does it feel like in, a year or 10 years or 20 years? It has a debilitating effect on our physical bodies, right? Like our nervous systems, our immune systems. And if you would have lived in Arizona, constantly go, 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 go. Although I will say this, I ride motorbikes, and I don't know that that's a bad thing. But if you're
we're both waiting for the warmer weather to go out again.
Nice. Yeah, I could ride here all the time. That's pretty good. But if you're doing it to outrun stuff, like, am I choosing to do it, or am I compelled to do it? Like, those are two different things, right? How long can you do that until your system says,
Well, I can tell you too, like it started to kind of not end well, because like, I mean, when I was younger, I dealt with like mad anxiety, where I was on, it was anti-anxiety medication. Like I was on a long-term, and then I was on like lorazepam, for like attacks and this, that, and the third. And it went away like for a while. Like I had zero anxiety. Once I got sober, I had zero anxiety. But then when I moved back, like I felt that anxiety building. So like I realized that I started taking Xanax because my anxiety was so damn high. And it just got to a point to where it was just, it wouldn't have ended well just because of that. Because right there, I was constantly outrunning. It was go, 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 go. And my anxiety was always so high. And this is something like I wasn't upfront with Brianna. I didn't tell her, that I was taking medication because I was dealing with the anxiety, and like I was flying out here once a month to visit and whatnot. And so then I get like the anxiety and the stress from flying once a month, and I get it from from being at home, and I'm dealing with my family, and now I'm dealing with work, and now I'm dealing with triggers and
not having support because you can't tell her about it. So you're
exactly.
carrying it yourself.
Yeah, and so I did get to a point, where she did, she did find out, that I was, taking, that I was taking anxiety meds and this, that, and the third, but it was just like, I'm glad that I'm here and I'm in this point of my life, because that was just, it was a constant.
Yeah, it sounds exhausting.
It was draining, mentally and physically draining.
Yeah.
Mike, I had to drag him out here.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did. For one thing.
I flew to Arizona and brought him back with me, but he got into a motorcycle accident.
Oh, no.
It put him down. And I just kind of told him, you can't work for a while. Now's the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I physically was not able to, I had no job, because I was out. I had a broken knee. Oh. And I was we always talked about me moving out here, but it just never, it was always I got to get the logistics. I got to get a job, I have my kids, this, that, and the third. And my kids moved with their mom out of state, and then it was I have no kids with me now.
Yep.
I have no job. So she hopped on a plane and came out and got me. So I was what better time than now,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's... Sorry.
No, I'll say, but that, I will tell you that, as much as, it sucked to, get away from my kids and my family and all that, that right there was probably one of the best decisions that I could have ever made.
Yeah. For us,
because people don't understand what I was dealing with at home.
Yeah,
my family was, oh, you're home. You haven't been home in 4 years. This, that, and the third. But they weren't realizing what I was going through, and so for her to pull me out here, it was almost just it was a breath of fresh air. Even though nobody understood. And now I've been out here next, on the 14th of February, will be a year since I moved out here. So now being here almost a year, I look back and I'm just holy shit. I've just where I've grown from a year, and I've still got a lot of growing to do. And I'm going through therapy myself and whatnot. But if I would have stayed there, I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it illustrates a few things for me. One is I'm glad you came. Nice Valentine's Day gift, by the way, to make a huge change like that. We have a saying that's, even when it comes to your kids and all that kind of stuff is, it's when you go on the airplane and they go, okay, here's the exits and you do this. What do they say about that mask, right? They say you put the mask on yourself first before you help other people. And I've heard lots of people, family members when I've been working in treatment, and they say he came back home and now he just goes to these meetings and it's so selfish. And it's no, it's self first, because if he doesn't take care or she don't take care of themselves, they can't actually be there for family. So here you are sort of I can picture treading water and keeping your head above water and constantly kind of running. But is that what recovery is all about? Right. And this is two of our first clients. One was 9 years clean and one was 14 years clean. And the thing was, they had done everything that the programs they were in had recommended of them. And those programs had done amazing things for them, but they also suffered from things like anxiety. And I think anxiety gets thrown around a lot as a word, so people don't actually understand. It's not nervousness, you know what I mean? Feeling anxiety isn't oh, I feel nervous. It's debilitating, right? It's physical in your body. It's to the point where people get really hopeless, right? And if you have a history of addiction or substance use, you already got pathways in your brain where you know how to change the way that you feel. And if you're dealing with anxiety and it's so intolerable, this stuff can lead towards other things. The other thing is, I think taking medication for that probably saved your ass, because if you wouldn't have taken medication and dealt with the anxiety, you would have ended up possibly medicating yourself through other means, right? So that really could have saved you in that spot. And I think that stuff, I think our program, I think really dovetails quite nicely with traditional recovery programs, because we recommend take something like a 12-step program. we don't have a worldwide fellowship of people available for you to seek support that are free everywhere in so many languages. Like, we can't provide that. We have limitations. And the flip side of that is like a 12-step program also has limitations in that it can get you clean. But it, like, my sponsor back in Canada, like, his job, he's awesome at his job. But you don't want to talk to him about like your childhood stuff, because it's like, he'll go, give it to God, pray, go to a meeting, do that stuff, which is like cool, but like that isn't therapy, right? So
that's just the top of the water.
Yeah, each thing has its limitations, and I think they can go together. And I think where any program kind of gets in its own way is where it says like, we do everything for everyone. It's like, that's not possible. Like, sometimes if I have a cavity, I go to a dentist. If I need braces, I go to an orthodontist. Like, they're not the same thing, even though they're in the same field, if that makes sense. Like, and I think that, sometimes things can be very complementary of each other, which is why we always recommend people do some form of recovery program, like traditional support group stuff. Cause like, how do you replace human connection and support? Like, that's so important to do. And we can't offer that on a worldwide basis. So, yeah, I think there's so much more to it, right?
It's funny. Like here we are having a therapy session, and that's funny because like you never know like which way these episodes are gonna go. Sometimes we've literally gone the whole episode where we talked about like recovery and like in the moment, and we didn't even. I will be transparent. I am on call for work tonight, and I have to go pick somebody up from the jail. So, not right now, but I have about half hour before I have to leave. So I'm sorry, but, my boss called me right now and I was like, can you give me 30 minutes? And she goes, yeah.
I appreciate transparency. That's cool. And
no, it just
huge.
happened. It just happened.
I want to point out a couple of things and then ask you some questions, Mike. One, I'm really glad that you pointed out that his self-medicating could have led to other things, because it actually was right before he moved out here, which is something, he wasn't honest about, but I'm an addict. I recognized it. And from New York, I called him out on it, and it was tough, but he was honest about it. And then, it took me a while. This is my hugest thing with people, especially getting off Suboxone. Not everyone takes the MAT route. But getting off Suboxone, I realized how important therapy was, because although maintenance medicine saved my life, okay, but it does still suppress our feelings.
Sure.
And that's just my personal thoughts on it. But it definitely suppressed my feelings. And as I started tapering more, those started coming. And when I got off Suboxone, I can't even pinpoint when it happened, but that fog just lifted. There's one day it was gone, and I felt everything.
Sure.
And that's when I called my therapist back, and I was like, "Oh, hey, do you want to keep doing this?" So then I have a question for you. So I got clean right before COVID. So I've had counselors in rehabs, I've had therapists, I've had prescribers, but I've never met in person.
Oh, wow.
I've done it all over Zoom.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
You were still with the rehab when COVID happened, when COVID hit, or were you in Thailand already?
Oh, I was at a rehab in Thailand here for 9 years.
Yeah, because you've been there 11 years.
Yeah.
So what is the difference that you notice with clients, patients, whatever you want to call them, between working through stuff just like this as opposed to the benefits of doing it in person? I know, like me, I will say I have benefited greatly from my Zoom meetings. I've literally, some people will be like, "Oh, where's their office?" I'm like, "I don't know. I've never been in their office. No clue." They're like, "Well, where's your last psychiatrist? What's their address?" I'm like, "I don't know. I can give you their Zoom ID though." That's all I know.
Yeah.
So what are some of the benefits of, both ways that you've come across?
Well, I think I'd be interested to know like what my clients would say to that, because for me, I'm not the vulnerable person in that situation. So I'm like, yeah, it's working great for me. feels like it's going well. But the truth is, like, there's a lot of studies that have been done about it. So again, particularly I do a lot of EMDR, right? It's like it became, after I got trained in it about 8 or 9 years ago, um, and I was starting to get more focused on the trauma stuff. That's why people would seek me out. So it ended up that I would do a lot of that. And there's been a lot of research done about the efficacy of EMDR online as opposed to in person. I haven't seen studies with other particular therapies, but the outcomes are almost the same as far as like online or in person. I will say this: as a client, I I might feel more connected to someone if I was in the room. As a therapist, there's times when I feel slightly disconnected from people on Zoom, but as a client, I also didn't mind having like little barriers between myself and other people. So sitting in my own space at home where I'm comfortable, I don't have to go outside. I don't have to walk into your space that might be intimidating. Like that might actually make it more comfortable for me to be able to seek this stuff out. I will say I've never had anyone in a face-to-face session in any office I've ever had like start pulling out a vape or smoking or something. But like when people are on Zoom, they're quite comfortable. They start doing that stuff. Or like I've had people show up with food. So like it's weirdly informal, which I think actually in some ways helps. Like the rehab that I was working at, we're in Thailand, it gets like 40 degrees of, 100 and something degrees, right? For Fahrenheit. And clients would say to me like, why are you in a long sleeve shirt and long pants? And I would say like, that's just, and I'm like covered in tattoos, and that's how the business wanted it. And like they wanted it to look professional, but the clients appreciated authenticity, right? And transparency. Like, what Jared just did. It's like, I'd rather you say, hey, I got to get out of here in half an hour than him be sitting around for half an hour trying to figure out how to maneuver this thing into a nice ending in a half an hour's time. It's like, authenticity is just so good. So at my center, like we have short sleeve collared shirts because we want to like present some level of professionalism, but I wear shorts and
I just had to remind myself that we're sitting here recording, that you're not at work right now. Cause I'm looking, I'm like, you're not dressed like that though.
No, it's.
I had to remind myself we're in a different setting, Brianna.
I'll tell you, because I'm the boss. Once if the clients are there and they're, if we have developed rapport and a good therapeutic alliance and stuff, on a casual Friday, I'll let myself wear the EMDR shirt because it's sort of work oriented. But it's Sunday morning at 9 a.m. and I'm sitting at home in a makeshift office. So I think there's benefits to it, to the online stuff, and there might be drawbacks. And I think it's really up to the client, because I have clients who also say like, I wouldn't benefit from a therapist. Like I like sitting with you because, people with addictions, they go, you've been there, right? Because I used for 20 years before I got clean, and now I got a little over 20 years clean. And I always think to myself, like, but therapy is a skill set, and using drugs isn't one of those skills. But empathy is a skill where you go, oh, Brianna, that sounds really terrible. Like but if you can go, oh, Brianna, I've sat there, like, it's not the skill of empathy, it's actual empathy. It's like, oh, I've been there and I know what you feel. So like, I think that there's benefits to doing online and doing it in person. I think there's benefits, like different clients prefer different things. I think for me, I prefer a woman therapist, and it's because I was raised by my mom, essentially abandoned by my dad, which, that leads right all into the addiction stuff and my relationships and, my insecure attachments and anxieties around like relationships, whether they were romantic, business, like whatever. I've always had that kind of stuff until I started getting some therapy going on. I think that different people have different preferences about how they work. So like I say, I would be curious to know how the clients see it. And you said it's been effective for you. I do think the prescribing without meeting someone is a little stranger, but I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. I'd be curious to ask Dr. Lisa.
The way I got to that point is I actually I didn't go to the person's clinic. We met at like a mutual place, and I actually got a psych eval done.
Okay. Yeah.
And we sat there for like 3.5, 4 hours, did this huge, intense, psych eval.
Yeah.
And then she passed along her recommendations to my rehab. And it took me a little while to accept some of the stuff that was said, but it wasn't just, all over. I did want to go and, get an evaluation done. I didn't just want, a therapist to do it or my counselor. Like, I wanted to sit and dig into my stuff and be honest, So yeah, it started with a psych eval.
Yeah, good.
And then it took a little while to accept everything. And then we started trying medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, there's medicine can be very life-saving, right? And I think, when you say like after getting off Suboxone, the fog lifted, and it's like, yeah, well, I mean, even if it's a replacement therapy, it's still like a nervous system depressant. Like it slows down your nervous system, so it's going to suppress some of the things, right? So it is going to, but that's where like all of a sudden, if you're not doing anything like therapy and stuff, like now I don't have my medicine anymore, and I have all the pain. Like now what, right? Yeah. I talk to family members, and they say, if I ask, like, hypothetically, like your family, like what's beyond this problem? They're like, it's the drugs. And I ask you, and you're like, the drugs are actually my solution to living with all of life's shit. Right. So it's like people that don't live with it don't get it. It's now all of a sudden here you are without your medicine. And it's like, okay, well, therapy better step in there, and support groups will do a good job of supporting some of that in the beginning, in my experience. But I think a lot of people would benefit from doing that deep dive that you did, and both of you, and I've done some of it myself, of course. I'm a big believer in it. So
let me ask you this: what made you want to do this, to get into to what is your title? You're clinical director?
Yeah. So
he was sick of his old job.
Well, I know that, but it was like, what triggered in your mind to want to go help people with their trauma? Like, even though you're dealing with your own shit,
Well, so when I went to treatment the second time, I stayed, it was funny, like guys that would come in would be like, where do you live? And I'm like, here, like I live here. Like I stayed for 6 months. I had, my relationship, long-term relationship had moved out. I lost another apartment. I had a production company. All my video equipment and editing equipment was in a pawn shop. Like things were not going great in my life. So I don't have anywhere to live. I don't have a job. I don't have anywhere to make money. I ended up at 32 years old, like on my mom's couch, and she had a conversation with a friend of hers who was a Nar-Anon member whose husband was in recovery, who said, like, you're killing this kid. Every dollar you give him is another dollar that he's using. She kind of, advocated the very tough love route. And my mom said, look, like, I want to support you, but I'm not going to support anything that isn't, wellness, right? Like you got to recovery stuff. You got to get well. And she said, and I'm not supporting anything else. Like there's no more money. There's no more nothing. And because my mom was like the chief enabler, right? Like her anxiety, if I was out using, was so high that she felt better about like paying me money, because then at least she kind of like didn't have to worry about what I might be doing. And that wasn't about me. That was about her own anxiety stuff, right? She was medicating herself by enabling me. But anyway, 4 days after we had this conversation, I'm in treatment, and I stay for 6 months. And then, the director and a support worker, the director sits me and one of the support workers, which I think in some rehabs in America are called techs or something. But he sits us down, and I've been there for 6 months at that point. And I've been doing a bit of volunteering kind of stuff around, like as a sort of like trusted client sort of thing. He sits us down and goes, do you want the good news or the bad news? And in my head, I'm going, how am I in this meeting? Like I'm a client with two staff members, kind of like, what's going on? And me and the support guy, we look at each other and we look at him and we go, we both say at the same time, the bad news. And so we're at like a satellite site from the main site. So he points at that guy and says, on Monday morning, you start at the main site. And he points at me and he goes, on Monday, you get his job. And I remember thinking, like, I don't remember fucking applying for a job here. Like, I have a production company. Like, I'm a client. Like, looking back on it now, super unethical to like hire someone who's your client. But, I didn't know about that at the time. And so we go, well, what's the good news? And he goes, well, you're getting a raise. And he points at me. He goes, well, you're going to get paid. And I was like, I didn't have any plans of anywhere to go or anything. So I just kind of went like, all right, whatever. So I started working in the support role. And then I found that I liked it. I liked connecting with other people. I was talking about recovery. Basically, like I was just getting paid to do the same thing I was doing as a senior client, was talk recovery with guys, gave me a bit of responsibility, it was a 12-step recovery house. So it was like the guys did all the chores, they cooked all the meals, they did all that. So I kind of oversaw some of that, and I started doing a bit of paperwork. And then they put me through a 6-month family therapy course, Satir family therapy. And I liked it. So I started going to school. And I remember the executive director guy said to me one time, he goes, "What do you go to school for more counseling for?" And I said, "Well, if I'm going to have the job, like I want to get good at it. Like I should be good at the job if I'm going to do it." He goes, "You got enough counseling. You should take a business course." It's like, it's probably not a good thing to tell someone who's barely done any education and works at your place, but good way to keep the golden handcuffs on, right? Or sorry, I guess like bronze handcuffs at that point. But so I started going to school, and just through school, I started meeting like these really amazing people that had ideas and knowledge that I didn't have. Like, I came from a very 12-step place, which was awesome, like really helped me. But, it opened my eyes to things about like, harm minimization or harm reduction things actually help save lives. Because where I was from, it was very stigmatized, right? You're not clean and all that stuff. Yeah. And it was like, well, like, they started teaching me about client-centered work, like where it's about, your goals and your needs and your preferences instead of like my agenda and what I believe and stuff. And I watched a lot of people that were also in 12-step in these courses, like really struggle with that. But I got some scholarships into like narrative therapy trainings through one of the professors there, and connected with the narrative therapy community, which that was a struggle for me. Because they're like, the whole thing about narrative therapy, you don't pathologize people. So I'm like, I'm an addict. And they're like, you have a relationship with substances. Like you don't name yourself. Like the problem doesn't exist within you. Like you have a relationship with stuff. And I was like, wait, but I'm once an addict, always an addict. Like, it was really a struggle. But what it did is it taught me to like kind of open my mind about stuff, which is one of the cornerstone principles of a 12-step program anyway. And then I just kept going to school, and I was working at the second treatment place I was at, and a couple of the guys there worked at an outpatient place. And oddly enough, as soon as I started there, the boss of that outpatient place called me and said, "I heard I should get you to facilitate some men's groups for me." So I started doing that. She mentored me into like getting certifications, because I was like basically just like shooting from the hip at that point. I'd done some schooling, but I didn't have any sort of credentials, and she helped me get credentialed. And then, it just like progressed slowly but surely. Lots of like cobbling together, lots of trainings. And when I was in Thailand, and they said, "Do you want to go do any MDR training? Because we're going to start a trauma track in this treatment center." And I said, I thought EMDR sounded like a bunch of like wacko sort of like, you're moving your fingers in front of someone's eyes. Sounds like bullshit to me. Like I'm a super skeptical guy. And I thought, but I get a free trip to Hong Kong. So sign me up. I'm in. Right. And me and a few colleagues went, and I was like, I'd been to Hong Kong once, but I was like, I was excited to go back. And the first day, like we were learning together. So it'd be like if the three of us sat in a room, because it was 3 people, and we're learning how to do this therapy, which is a very strict scripted protocol. And it's like, okay, so hold on. When do I move my fingers? How do I do this? Like, it was really weird, but I had to bring a problem. Like, they're like, bring something that's upsetting, but from 0 to 10, like, don't make it over 5. They didn't want a room full of people all like super fucked up. Right. So like, don't bring a problem that's over 5. So I brought something that, and at this point I was like 45 years old, not 35, 45 years old. And I brought this memory from when I was 15 years old, and it was like mildly upsetting, but it was affecting. Basically they said, "What's something that's going on in your life right now that's upsetting?" And I said, "Yeah, there's this thing at work. I don't really feel super valued about stuff." And they go, "When's the first time you felt that, like not important or something?" And I was like, "Oh, this memory when I was 15. We were moving. I had finally like fallen in with this group of friends. Like I found my people, skateboarders, into drugs, but we're like also smart and like to read and do art and stuff, like, a bit creative. So we didn't really fit in with any other group of people. And I found my people. And then my mom was like, "We're moving cities." And I was like, and I don't get a say in this. My first, serious girlfriend, I have to leave her. And like, I remember sitting in the back of this van, just like crying as a 15-year-old little punk rock skateboarder kid, and not feeling important. And when I thought about that memory, it still like bothered me. And so this guy who's never done this therapy is like, okay, following the protocol, do this, do that. Oh, moving my fingers, doing this. By the end of like half an hour, it didn't bother me anymore. And when they talked about the thing at work, like they were like, how do you feel about that thing at work now? And I was like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, I know I'm important. Like it like, I was like, what, how the fuck did that happen? And we didn't even talk about the memory at 15 other than to like, what's the picture you see in your mind? Right. So I was like, how did that happen? And I had a colleague that was with me who had just went through the big earthquakes in Nepal where Kathmandu had like crumbled, and he was there. And when we were at the training, we were on like the 5th floor of this university, and we started getting all like kind of vertigo symptoms of like, he didn't feel safe in this building and stuff. And the trainer took him away, and the next thing you know, he comes back and he's fine. And so I'm like, okay, what the fuck is going on? And then I had this woman that I was the guy now doing this. She's like, my fiance, like, or my boyfriend wants to get engaged, but the last time I was engaged, I walked into my house and my fiance at the time was like having sex with someone else on our sofa. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm so afraid when I think about getting married, I just get like sick to my stomach. There's no way I can do it. And so I'm like, okay, so what's the image? And I'm like, do I move my fingers now? Like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, I'm just learning this thing. Yeah. At the end of 20 minutes, she's like, it doesn't bother me anymore at all. And so EMDR is 8 phases. The 8th phase is when you come back after the session. So the next session, you go, how's all that stuff from the last time? The next day we met up and I said, how are you? Like, so, I'm the new guy, don't know what I'm doing. And we just did this thing yesterday that you said doesn't bother you anymore. And she goes, I went up to my room, called my boyfriend. We're getting married. I can't wait to do it. I feel so excited. I feel safe. I know he's not that guy that did that. They're different people. Like, her whole paradigm shift happened around it. And I was like, how does this happen?
Kara's going to send me now to get this.
I was just about to say, can you do some EDMR on Brianna so she marries me?
If Brianna wants that.
She read my mind because she said it at the same time.
They're married and have, you know what I mean? Like, and that was with someone who didn't know what they were doing in 15 minutes. So at that point I was like, this changed everything from me working at the rehab and doing talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, that kind of stuff. I was like, how did we get that kind of result in like under an hour? And then I found out that's quite typical. And so, I've sat with people, and this isn't me, this is EMDR. Like, I've been taught this thing, but like people that have childhood sexual abuse experiences literally at the end of an hour, or, sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes multiple sessions, but sometimes it takes a lot shorter, but typically like maybe in an hour, hour and a half. And they're like, oh, I actually, it's not a happy memory. It's not an erased memory. It's just that when I think about it, the evidence of EMDR is that memories become less vivid, harder to recall. So they're not as intrusive. You lose the flashbacks and the nightmares and the intrusive thoughts. So harder to recall, less vivid and less disturbing, meaning you don't get that gut punch kind of, ugh. So it's not a happy memory, but I've had people at the end of an hour be like, and I know that there's nothing wrong with me. And I know that wasn't my fault. Like, because a lot of people form beliefs like I'm damaged or I was bad or I deserved it or I did something wrong to make that happen. Or, fucked up beliefs that we get around traumatic incidences. And it changes that stuff usually quite quickly. Now, I don't make promises that this will be the result for everyone, but there's so much research on it. And at that point, I was like, this is what I want to do. Because I've sat with so many clients that would get, they'd come into treatment, they do awesome, right? And they would get 2 months clean and then go home, or, they'd stay in town and do like sober living and stuff, get 6 months, a year, and then relapses would happen like all the time. I'd watch people like get significant amounts of clean time that they'd never had before. And then they would relapse and they'd come back and be like, I don't know what happened. And then we'd like unpeel more stuff. And it's like, oh, you're like, going back to your hometown and there's all these triggers, or, you know, you ran into like an abuser, or you're in a family dynamic, and like, it's all trauma shit. And I was like, that's the stuff I want to work with. And it reignited a fire underneath me for doing the work. It like just reinformed my practice. And so I got passionate about it. And I've done, like, I think during the pandemic, I did like 25 trainings on trauma, complex trauma, and EMDR, just because like I was already doing it before that, but it just sort of like really informed it, because the results can be quite dramatic and pretty quickly. Like,
yeah. Damn, I need to get some of that, you know, because like I was sexually abused at 8 as a child, and introduced to pornography, you know, by my stepfather at that time, and just all kinds of shit. And you don't realize at that young of an age how much that fucks you up as an adult.
Yeah.
My view on sex was something that was completely different. It opened up a whole, you know, pornography, just you know,
absolutely.
All kinds of shit, and you don't really like understand that as a child, you know.
No.
So it's just you know, so sometimes, you know, like some of the shit you sit there and it burns an image in your head, you know, and so and I might need to look into some of that.
Well, what EMDR does is like, you don't tell the traumatic narrative. Like, your brain can't tell the difference between what's happening and what it thinks is happening. And so evidence of that would be like a nightmare, right? I'm tucked up in bed, I'm super safe. My brain thinks about scary stuff. Next thing you know, my heart's racing, I'm sweating, like I'm physiologically responding to stuff that my brain is thinking. So when I tell a traumatic narrative, my brain is like, is this happening again? And it might very well re-traumatize me, right? So with EMDR, what we do is we say, you said that image gets burned into your brain, and that's really common. So we always say, when you think about that memory, what image represents the most disturbing part of it? When you think about that image, what's the negative belief you have about yourself? And it might be something like, you know, there's something wrong with me, I'm damaged, I'm a bad person, I'm not lovable, like whatever it might be, some kind of negative belief. What would you prefer to believe? Well, I'd prefer to believe I'm okay as I am. How true does that feel when you think of that image? Well, it doesn't fucking feel true at all, because I just told you I believe that I'm damaged, right? So, okay, when you think about that image and the words I'm damaged, what emotions come up? Oh, I feel shame, sadness, anger, whatever. How strong from 0 to 10? 8. Where do you feel it in your body? In my stomach, my chest, whatever. Okay. And we, obviously I'm doing this really quickly. But you don't tell that story. There's actually a thing called a protocol called blind to therapist, where I can work with a memory with someone and they don't even have to tell me what the memory is, which is insane to me. And still there's a skeptical part of me that's like, there's no way that can work. And yet I've seen it work, like lots of times. So it's called the gentlest form of trauma therapy, because you don't have to relive this shit. Right. And at the end of it, the memory becomes harder to recall. People tell me all the time, it feels like distant, like it feels blurrier. I feel farther away from it. I can see it, but it doesn't bother me anymore. And I don't believe I'm damaged anymore. I know I'm fine. Because what we're doing is we're connecting that memory to adaptive neural networks. As an adult, I know that wasn't my fault. But that young part of me that experienced it takes on blame for it and holds that belief for a long time. So we're connecting it to these adult knowings of it's not my fault, like neurologically. So that like all of a sudden I don't believe that about myself anymore. And you can get relief from this stuff really quick. And those beliefs can affect your whole life, right? So it's like time to put that shit down. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for EMDR. I'm a huge believer. And that's, I guess the question was, how did I get to be kind of like what I'm doing? So then Yatra was like, instead of having people like I was talking about, you know, someone in their flat in London, or, you know, someone in Sweden or in America, you know, saying, I can't really do all this other stuff. Like I can't do the mindfulness. I can't do the yoga. I was like, okay, well, you're responding well to the EMDR and IFS. We do internal family systems therapy about like inner child, but like a whole inner family. Right. I want to bring it all to one place. If you can't do that stuff at your house because it's too big of an ask, which of course it is because it's hard to do, then I'll bring it to you. If you come here, we'll put all this comprehensive stuff in one place. You get out of your environment, out of your triggers. You can put down that stuff that you're carrying, allow your nervous system to relax. You get downtime where we're not just keeping you busy, but you do get to do all kinds of physical stuff, body work. We take people kayaking out on boats to islands, that kind of shit too, because you're in Thailand, you got to see that. And we got monkeys that cruise through the site, which is kind of cool. Unless you have a monkey phobia, but we can do EMDR on that, so that's all right.
Yeah. If before I wish we had more time because I gotta get going here soon. But before we wrap
Maybe we
up,
can do this in two.
No, I know. I was gonna say I want to have you on again, definitely, because this was a great episode. It was I think it's very educational, and that's kind of something that we're trying to mix up. We're not trying to have like every episode be like a recovery story. We want to throw in.
I stopped asking questions too.
However,
Jared had to leave.
No, but however, though, I do want to hear your story and about you yourself and whatnot. So we'll definitely have to do that. But for the people that maybe want to get some more information on Yatra Center, where can they find you guys at? Where can they do some research and support you?
I think it's good timing. All my lights just kicked off.
Yeah, I was like, what happened?
Batteries.
Sorry.
So Yatra Center, so it's kind of weird English spelling of it. YATRACENTRE, yatracenter.com. And we're in Krabi, Thailand, and we got some videos up and stuff. So lots of information. You can send an email, and we're happy to give information. I'd love to be back. I know I get into storytelling mode.
No, you're good. You're good. Normally I'm good, but it's my weekend to be on call, and normally I don't ever get called when I do a podcast, but this just happened to be it. So,
it sounds like your job's important. If you're going to pick someone up at jail, they need that, man. So,
yeah, I do like medical transport, and then I just the stuff like that. So we pick people up from jail and we take them to like their motels, and we do a lot of stuff like that. So. It's an important thing, every now and then too. But we'll put the links. I
was going to say, when I got out of jail, the person giving me a ride was important to me. So I think it's important what you're doing.
Well, the cool thing too is we do a lot of the treatment facilities and whatnot, and I get to have like a lot of in-depth conversations with these clients. Sweet. About they're coming out of they're in outpatient rehab, or they're coming out of the mental ward, so we get to have some really good conversations. And so sometimes my job sucks, but then at the other times, if I find it very rewarding because I get to have those conversations with people.
Sure, man.
But we'll put all the links in the description. But everybody go follow Yatra Center, go do some research. If anybody wants to take a trip out there, hit up Mr. Mike.
Well, I'll say this too.
Definitely check it out.
We also have a scholarship program where if people legitimately have financial barriers and we're in a position to help. So like we have one other saying, we're a clinic run by a clinician. We're not a business run by a businessman. So like part of our mandate that we have is that we want to always, whenever possible, be able to give people scholarships. So people can apply to us through hello@yatracenter.com. And, we can't obviously guarantee scholarships to everyone. We do quite big assessments to make sure that they're the right fit and all that. I'm not going to check people's bank details. I believe they're reaching out because they need the help. But if there is an option for that, because we know it's a big ask, fly to Thailand, all that. We don't cover flights, but we can cover treatment for some people sometimes. So, it's a worthwhile venture to give us a check out for that.
Definitely.
I was playing around on the website. I've visited the website quite a few times.
Yeah.
But I kind of went a little more in depth earlier.
It's undergoing some changes right now. We've recently moved and renovated a new site. So it's exciting.
Well, we will.
Sounds exciting.
I would, I don't know. I wish that's something that we could do, but I don't know. Who knows? Maybe down the line when we don't have kids.
Well, I came as a guest on Chuck's show, and the next thing you know, here he is, right? So.
Yep. Right. All right. So, exactly. So, all right, Mike, man, I appreciate you coming on today. Thank you again for your time. That's going to wrap up another episode of today's podcast. I said that right. I almost fucked up my outro. It's okay, though. Anyways, make sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite platform. Don't hesitate to leave a like and a comment. Every interaction helps us reach more people, and share with friends and family. You never know who needs to hear some words of encouragement. And remember, no matter what life throws your way, there's always a reason to hold on to hope. And until next time, we signing off.